Hello everyone, good evening, and thank you very much for coming. Along with this section of Culture and Education of the British Embassy, today we are happy to introduce a beautiful talk by Matt Peacock about making theatre arts and opera helpful for homeless people. So Matt will tell about his projects. As for our inclusion department at the museum, it's very active currently, and since last year we've been trying to broaden the term of inclusion. By inclusion now we understand inclusion of everyone into art projects and cultural projects, and hopefully today we'll have a chance to learn from our British colleagues. Now I'm passing the mic to Katya, our colleague from the section of education of culture and art and education of the British Embassy. Hello everyone, thank you very much for coming. I won't take too much time. I just wanted to reiterate that this year we are hosting the Year of Music, Russia and UK. So please subscribe to our mailouts. We have a lot of beautiful projects, internships. I want to say thank you to the Garage Museum of Contemporary Arts. This is our partner, and let's greet Matt Peacock now. He is going to tell us all about his great projects, and your questions will be also welcome.
Dobry wieczór. Mnie zawód Matt. Rad was widzieć.
Good evening, my name is Matt. I'm happy to see you, and thank you very much to the British Council, the British Embassy, and the Garage Museum.
So it's, I feel very honored to be here amongst some amazing people who've been on this list of speakers in this amazing venue. I feel particularly emotional. My grandmother was Russian. This is my first visit to Russia, and so I think of her when I'm here. Sometimes when I travel the world and I visit countries that have a big homeless problem, and let's face it, every country is having a difficult time with homelessness, and in every single country homelessness is going up, apart from Finland, where Housing First started. So this is the only country in the world where homelessness is going down. And in particular when I go to countries where the homeless problem is very difficult for some reasons, in very hot countries. I've spent the last 10 years in Rio and Sao Paulo, and actually coming to the very cold countries as well, and seeing people freezing, and the deaths on the streets that we have in Russia and other countries. I question to myself, what could the role of the arts be? Surely there's many more important things than the arts and getting people into shelter, into warmth. But in the darkest places, we need light, and we need to believe that there is another way. And this is what the arts can do. I was in Brazil not so long ago, walking past 18,000 homeless people, and I was saying to my guide, a homeless man who is working there for the street paper, and I said, surely the arts is, useless in this humanitarian crisis. And he looked me in the eye and said, we need the arts because it makes us human. So I hope over the next hour and a half, I'm able to describe why I feel that the arts is important in homelessness and in inclusion throughout the world, in every country, all the time. With One Voice is quite a new organization. It's the second NGO that I've set up, and it's basically a movement and a network of organizations and homeless artists around the world who work with arts and creativity. My story starts here. I was a support worker in the Passage Night Shelter in London at the end of the 1990s. I did this part-time. I had a caseload of about 6 or 7 homeless people at any one time. They would come into the center off the streets We would help them. We would give them a bed for the night, a hot meal, and we would try and sort out their documentation. And in England, the documentation is about getting someone's passport in order for the homeless centre to then apply for some funding so they can stay. At this point, it didn't matter where you were from. You could be from anywhere around the UK, anywhere around the world. And organisations like this would give you a bed. And in my talk, I wanted to tell you a little bit about my journey through this system, which is full of anguish and heartbreak, but also full of laughter and of joy and power, because we're talking about the arts here. And along the way, I've come up with a few light bulb moments, moments of clarity, which I feel are quite important to me, and I want to share those with you. The first light bulb moment is that homeless is not just about housing. So I started working in homelessness because I felt that I couldn't walk past someone on the street and not be able to help them after a while. I wanted to do something, I didn't know what to do. One of my roommates then got really annoyed with me and said, you know, you always talk about homelessness, but you actually do nothing. So I thought, well, maybe I should do something. So I volunteered for the passage. And as soon as I walked through those doors, I realized that homelessness isn't just about housing. It's about many things. Sorry, this is all in English. Here's some statistics. So in the UK, 70% of homeless people have mental health issues, some undiagnosed. And with the rest of the public, that's 35% of the public have mental health issues. So that's a double the problem. Suicide rates in England for homeless people are 7 times higher than the general public. Loneliness and isolation is a really big problem. So when people are getting rehoused and put into social housing, the problems don't stop there. And 25% of people who go back onto the streets, the reason is because of loneliness. There are 8,000 people on the streets, roughly, in England at any one time. That's gone up a lot, but that's only a snapshot. In most countries around the world, there's a street count every 3 months. So the government, the local government, it's their duty to count how many homeless people there are on the streets. And every country I've seen this happening, apart from Russia, so far. And that number gives a sort of indication of not necessarily the exact number, but trends, whether it's going up or going down. But in England, the amount of hidden homeless people is almost 400,000. And that's people who are sleeping on the metro, on night buses, in internet cafes, sofa surfing, in squats. Maybe not the people you see every day who are begging, but people who are in some ways as vulnerable, sometimes even more vulnerable. There's no street count here. There's an estimated 3 to 4 million homeless people. And all of these figures come from the amazing organization Nachleska from St. Petersburg and Moscow, who are leading the way in gathering data and making the case to the government for support. And according to Nachleska, 50% of the beneficiaries have moved to the city to find work. And the biggest problem, as we all know, is a lack of residential registration. So this is the core of the homelessness situation, as I understand it, as I've been told in this country. And it's interesting to note, actually, that in England, which is a tiny country, there are 2,000 homelessness services, homeless centres, accommodation centres, day centres, advice centres. And in the biggest country in the world, with 9 time zones, there is 200 such services, which is not enough for the 3 million people who are homeless here. The other part of my story is that I was a music journalist and I was an opera critic. So I spent my days reviewing operas, traveling around the world, seeing operas, interviewing opera stars and directors. And then I spent one evening a week in the night shelter, which was frankly, a really interesting life. But the two sides never joined. Until one night in the centre, one of the residents read out this quote from the newspaper, and a member of parliament, an MP, a politician, had said that the homeless are the people you step over coming out of the opera house. This created a lot of anger with some people, and for others, for one or two, they saw it as an opportunity, because they said their situation is not going to be helped long term by food and blankets. What they wanted was the public to see them differently. They wanted people to stop walking past them and ignoring them, but to stop and maybe have some kind of understanding and maybe share a cigarette or have a talk. So they said, if we were in an opera, that would change people's opinion. It would rattle cages. It would be much better. So then everyone turned to me and said, don't you work in opera? I've heard that you're a music journalist. Let's make this happen. So of course, this was the most ridiculous, the craziest idea I'd ever come across, homeless people starring in an opera. So obviously it had to work. I had some connections at the Opera House. They'd just done a renovation, the one before last. And we were given one of the theatres for 2 nights. And so we put on this children's opera with a local primary school and the homeless people starring together. We rehearsed. I got in some favors from some singers. We had no money, but we did raise some money for the homeless center itself. And what happened was really interesting, because the motivation from the homeless people was to change public opinion. But what actually happened in the homeless center was that the dynamic changed. So instead of a place where it was very transactional, I was the support worker, you are the homeless person, I am the one with power, you are the powerless, I am the one who can help you, you are the one who's being helped. I don't really mind what you say to me, but I'm going to do that. That very destructive, very strange dynamic suddenly changed, with the people from the center, the people who were experiencing homeless, having ideas, being asked their ideas, their creative ideas. There was laughter in the rooms. There was homeless people helping the support workers who were less confident about being in an opera. It was very different. And when the opera happened and there was a queue out the door because people wanted to see this, and when the curtain fell and all the audience rose to their feet, for some of the performers, it was the first time that anyone had congratulated them. From birth to 60 years old, they'd always been a problem. They'd always been the person who was the problem. And this is what the arts did for them. It changed the dynamic, helped to change their identity from someone with problems to someone with skills. And one of the biggest barriers in homelessness is public opinion. And Nachalska was talking about this yesterday, about the new center in Moscow that is struggling to be built because of public opinion. But one thing the arts can do is very quickly and very radically change public opinion. And then what happened was everyone was hugging, everyone was very happy. And then one of the performers came up to me and said, "That was amazing. What's happening next?" And I said, well, nothing. You know, we did it. You know, you did it. It was fantastic. Well done. Goodbye. See you in the center next week. Well, I'll be getting your passport and we'll go back to that power dynamic. And I just realized that we had failed, actually. We had succeeded on one level, but we'd also failed. The power of the arts is very potent. And as soon as someone starts believing in themselves, if you take that away, that can be very damaging. When flowers grow, you water them. If you water them for a day, they'll be healthy. If you stop watering them, they'll die. And this is what we found very quickly with this project, which led me to my second, third, and fourth light bulb moments. So the second is that arts and creativity can change lives. I've seen it for 20 years. I will tell you a lot of stories about this. You know stories about this. It's a very powerful force. I also found that continuity is at the absolute core of any kind of arts and social change, social inclusion. Continuity has to be thought about. It's not a problem if projects start and end, that's normal, but they have to end with a planned ending or some kind of exit strategy. Otherwise, you're pulling the carpet from underneath people, and that is not good. And failures can be your greatest teachers. Many people in this field, working in social welfare, working with very damaged, very vulnerable people, find it quite hard to start projects unless they're perfect, and sometimes that's not possible. It's important to go in with an open heart and to expect that some things won't work, and they often don't work, particularly with people who do not believe in themselves. And what the arts is doing, the title of my talk, is giving people the permission to believe in themselves. So failures make us grow, and failures make us move from one bit of learning to the next, and then the next time will be better, and you'll repair some of those mistakes. Now, this is a long talk, an hour, and we're talking about creativity. So I don't really like talking about creativity without doing some. So I'm going to invite you to take part in our first creative intervention. Now for this, and I just sprang this quite late on my colleagues from the British Council in the garage, that you will need a piece of paper and something to write with. And there is some spares here. It's a very gentle drawing exercise. And the exercise is to turn to the person next to you, or you can do this in a 3 or a 4 if you've got some friends. And you have to draw them without looking at your paper. This is very important. So find someone to look at. It doesn't matter if you're in a 2 or a 3 or a 4. There's some paper coming around and some pens. Thank you for keeping your hands up. So again, the exercise, you will have 1 minute, just 1 minute, I'll be timing you, to draw somebody next to you, nearby, without looking at your paper. And I will be watching you. I will be able to see if you are looking at your paper. So welcome to a participatory art intervention for the community, us as the community. Okay, I'm going to time this. If you do not want to take part, that's also fine. Every art project needs an audience, so we do need audiences, that's fine. Who hasn't got a piece of paper and a pen still? There's a few more. We have some more. We are 100% inclusive, so we are going to wait until we have more pens. And you're also not allowed to start either. Everyone has the same 60 seconds. Not yet, not yet. There's still some, oh, sorry. Well, you can have 2 goes. There are still some people without a pen at the back. In fact, I've got some in my bag. Here, any more? Yeah? Great, great. Thanks so much. Right, has everyone got a pen now and a piece of paper? Oh, there's more. Maybe you can also share. We'll give you some extra time. There's some more coming. Okay. We're going to start in 10 seconds. And there's a lady at the back as well. There's a lady at the back. Great, I think we're ready. So, the instructions again, 60 seconds. You have to draw someone who's near you, next to you. You're not allowed to look at your paper. Are you ready? Go. Okay, so you draw someone near you, next to you. You don't look at your paper. You've got 60 seconds. Oh, you already did that? Oh, okay. Right, we've got 30 seconds to go. No looking at the paper. I can spot some people who may be looking at their paper. Trust your instincts. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Stop. Now look to see what you've done. So has anyone got any masterpieces? Beautiful. Great. Fantastic. Now write the person you drew, their name on it, and it's a gift for them. So this is obviously a very easy exercise we often use. It's a creative exercise for anyone in the community. It's full of joy and laughter, and it doesn't matter what you come up with. And sometimes it's more funny if you come up with something that's quite funny. So, the great mistake that happened in our first project, where we didn't continue after the show, led me to commit to doing it right the second time. So I left my job. I started this new charity called Streetwise Opera, and we committed to putting on operas with homeless people, and we committed to being there in the homeless centres every single week. Come rain or shine, we would always be there. And when the show came and went, the first show was Benjamin Britten's Canticles in Westminster Abbey. We said very publicly to everyone, the most important day of this exercise is the day after the show. You know, that is when we start working again. It's not just about the show. Good luck. You'll be amazing. But let's talk about the day after as well. And this is a philosophy that I see happening around the world, and I really promote that happening whenever it can. So Streetwise grew. We went from one centre in London to 10 centres around England, to working with around about 800 people, 800 homeless people every year. I did this for quite a long time. This was a show in 2016, which was Bach's St. Matthew Passion, a new operatic version of it, with a very famous British choir called the 16, who was singing next to the Streetwise performers. It was televised on the BBC, and we had been asked to be on TV quite a lot. Everyone really quite liked the idea of homeless people singing opera. I mean, how cool is that? We got asked to, go past the rounds of Britain's Got Talent and the X Factor to be in the semi-final, as long as you make sure that people are crying and they storm off and they have a terrible time. So obviously we said no to all that. But with the BBC, I said, please just televise this and let the public decide, what it's about. So there was a tiny little intro about this opera happening, and then it was televised on the BBC. It also had a new ending that we commissioned by Sir James Macmillan, and there's a little snippet here, very short snippet of the cast together, the professional singers from the 16 and the Streetwise performers singing together. And if you were to try and guess who is a professional and who is a homeless person, I bet no one in this room would get the right answer. So during this time, something quite interesting happened. So that was 2016. I went to a meeting in 2012 when the Olympics came to London. And the Cultural Olympiad said, there's always a cultural festival and cultural program in any Olympic Games. And they said, we really want to give a platform to homeless people. It wasn't to avoid people's gaze to other things they were doing. It was a genuine idea. In many Olympics in the past, including quite recently, homeless people are cleared away from the streets and they never come back. So this was a genuine chance for homeless people to take the stage. Streetwise Opera at that stage was one of the biggest organizations working in the field. So we said we'd be very happy to produce an event with homeless people from all around the UK, and we will ask them what they want to do. So we gathered 34 organizations, 300 homeless people who worked in theatre, and there was a band, there was a rap artist, there were choirs, and they inhabited the stage. And they wanted to say something very simple to the public. They wanted to show that homeless people had skills and talents, not just problems. And it was called With One Voice. And here it is, I think. No, here it is. There it is. Again, it was at the Royal Opera House. It became one of the biggest events in the Cultural Olympiad. And it was a one-off event, but we spent a lot of time making sure that all of the organizations were working with people afterwards, and they were all very much looked after. What was also really interesting is that this was the first time that any of these organizations had come together. We're all tiny organizations working in arts and homelessness. Homelessness is underfunded. You can imagine what arts and homelessness is. It's just, there's no funding around. So we brought these organizations together, and it led to my 5th light bulb moment, which is that together we are stronger. And I think in any sector, particularly emerging sectors, and arts and homelessness is decades behind arts and disability, it's decades behind even arts and criminal justice around the world. Arts and homelessness is really just starting. And so it was very enlightening for me and all the other organizations, the biggest ones like Cardboard Citizens in the UK, who've got a very big profile, that together, when we worked together, things were better. I often really love this metaphor of the sticks. We're all like sticks that can easily be broken, but if you put a pile of sticks together, it's much harder to break them. And we talk about this a lot in the movement because our friends in Sierra Leone and Uganda are just, nobody cares about what we're doing. But internationally, we're beginning to care. We're beginning to make a movement together. So 2012 happened. I was then invited with a delegation, a Cultural Olympiad delegation to Rio. And in 2016, the Brazilian government and the Cultural Olympiad really wanted to do a similar platform for homeless people in Rio. And I said the obvious question, I know a bit about homelessness in the UK. I know absolutely nothing about homelessness in Brazil. So we committed to writing a report on arts and homelessness, finding organizations there, finding out what they wanted, whether they wanted actually to have a showcase and an event like With One Voice. As it happened, they did want an event. And this was what it was. A collection of rather fewer organizations in Brazil. There were only 2 or 3 recognized arts and homelessness projects. But they wanted to learn from other people, and they wanted to exchange with projects in the UK mainly, where there were, not just 30 or 40 by then, but maybe 50 or 60 choirs, theatre companies, and so forth. So this became the first international exchange. You can see colleagues from Japan maybe there, and from the USA, and so forth. And this happened, 40 events around Rio, and a lot of workshops and practice exchanges and artist training, a lot of sharing. We came across, this was the delegation, the international delegation who came, who are mainly from UK. And we met this incredible organization, which is represented on the flag, the Movimento População da Rua, the homeless people's movement. And this changed many of our lives, because this was a movement that was entirely run and managed by homeless people. What had happened in 2003 in Sao Paulo was that there was an atrocity. 6 or 7 homeless people in a square got murdered, probably by the police, although that was never proved. And public outcry was such that the public wanted homeless people to have more of a legislative voice with local government. So the Movimento was formed. It enabled homeless people to have a direct link to the social welfare department of the local government. I've seen this work. Sometimes it works great. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes there's a couple of years where nothing happens, but it's there and it's in law. And it has changed the way quite a lot of us who came across this think about what I talked before about, this transactional power dynamic between people who aren't homeless and people who are homeless. And one thing that happened in Brazil was that I met this guy with the stripy top right at the end, who's called Rico. And he invited me to this center, and all these guys, I mean, he was a volunteer and a support worker. And he said that quite a lot of the time he was literally pulling people out of the gutter. And there's a lot of gun violence in Rio, so he was pulling bullets out of people. It was just a terrible situation. And you can see his smile, and he never loses that smile. And he played a bit of guitar, and so he was a volunteer, played some guitar. When I was there, when I visited, they sang a few religious songs, which was really lovely. We invited him back to the UK on the second international exchange. So UK people came to Brazil, Brazilians, including the deputy mayor of Rio, and a lot of politicians came to the UK. He started getting quite excited about the possibility of doing music full time, which wasn't really heard about on the streets of Rio. In the favelas, in the 600 favelas around Rio, arts is used a lot as a technology for social change and conflict resolution, but not on the streets. And so we helped him start some choirs. He started 4 choirs, and at 2016, one of the choirs sang at the lighting of the Olympic torch on the top of Corcovado, the Christ the Redeemer. They became quite famous in Rio. Lots of people talked to them on the street. They had a better relationship with the police. The police stopped seeing them as problems and seeing them Didn't I see you on TV doing some singing? And now they're based at the Museum of Tomorrow, which is one of the most famous museums in the world. They're based there, they have lunch there, they have a health advisor who comes there every week. And at this point, I was beginning to think, well, yes, the arts has a profound effect on people, but the cultural sector also can have a profound effect as well. There are tens of thousands of cultural centers like this one around the world, and quite a lot like this one really care and want to fulfill some kind of civic duty. They want to show art, they want to be a performance space, but they also want to be useful for the community. This is very exciting for everyone in social welfare, because these are the new safe spaces, these are the new community centers, these are the new day centers, and in certain countries, like Belgium recently, some of the main cultural institutions have opened up at night for refugees as night shelters and for homeless people. I think this is the start of a new wave of possibility in the world. And this brought me along to my third light bulb moment, which is, I didn't know this after 10 years of working in arts and social change, that the arts is a human right. And it's Article 27 of the UN Charter of Human Rights. And it took me to go to Brazil and for politicians to be in the audience. And I would go up to politicians and said, do you realize that in the UK, no politician would come to an arts event because it's seen to be, you know, peripheral and arts is a luxury. Why are you here? And they would say, arts is a human right. I'm from the Human Rights Department of Sao Paulo or Brasilia or Rio. And it's our duty to enable homeless people to access their human rights, arts being one of them. And they're using the arts in places like Sao Paulo to enable people to access other human rights. So they have art carts that go around some of the ghettos and the shanty towns with drawing paints and paper to enable people to access other human rights. Excuse me. So at this point, With One Voice stopped being a project of Streetwise Opera and needed to be an NGO in its own right, an organization in its own right. And this is what we do. We work with global homelessness using the arts to strengthen projects, influence policy, and help homeless people thrive, not just survive. We connect, we strengthen, we advocate, and we do it through exchanges, gathering people together and events. We put on some artwork ourselves, as well as convening others to do so. And we have a growing interest in advocacy, research, and training, which spells art, which is quite useful in English. And this year, we're going to start a laboratory, an art lab, to be a space for learning and a space for interrogation and a space for dreaming about what arts can do in this space of homelessness. When we started, we knew of about 76 projects around the world, mostly in the US and the UK, also in Australia, quite a few, but no one had done this mapping before. This year, there are more than 300, sorry? Yes, which is that one? Do tell me if I'm going too fast as well. Am I talking too fast? No? Oh, good, good. So we found 300. I mean, there are many more, obviously, but we're a team of like 3 people. So, you know, we're trying hard. And I wanted to give you a flavor of some of the most amazing projects around the world. So join me, if you will, on our trip around the world of arts and homelessness. I love Socorrisa in Tokyo. I've been working in Tokyo for 10 years. Homelessness there, if I can give a little summary, is about a lot to do with shame and a lot to do with high expectation. So people who drop out of society tend to be the ones who will never resurface, and the government and everyone in society will just not want to notice that they are there. This guy, Yuki, works with homeless people, usually in parks. He was a professional choreographer, and he did a show and realized there were loads of, in a park, and he realized there were loads of homeless people watching. And he wanted to give homeless people dignity. And they do the most incredible contemporary dance with people of all shapes and sizes, and we're hopefully going to bring them to tour the UK next year. Phenomenal project. They came to Rio as well. Sketch in Toronto in Canada. I suppose visual art is the biggest area of artistic activity in arts and homelessness around the world. Sketch is quite a large organization working with a lot of young people. Homelessness in the US is without a shadow of a doubt worse than anywhere else on the planet. There's a lot of reasons about that, but it's quite a lot to do with the poverty gap and there's no benefit system, no legal aid, no health insurance, and that's common in many countries. But I mean, in LA, there's 200,000 people living on the streets, and it's really a big problem. So in North America, in Canada, and in the US, there are a lot of organizations now. It's fantastic. And Sketch just do brilliant work with a methodology of just being. Be there, be with us, and do what you want with art. Shedia in Athens. There's a lot of street newspapers around the world. And there was one in St. Petersburg, which I found out yesterday has stopped happening, Put-Domoi, I think it's called. Yeah. So the street paper in Athens, they do an amazing thing, which I just love, which is that with the magazines that they don't sell, they create jewelry and furnishings, light shades, and it's like a sort of amazing social enterprise that homeless people themselves are trained to make this, sometimes really quite intricate jewelry. A lot of people buy it, the money goes to the homeless person and goes back into the foundation. And I own some of this, and it's absolutely beautiful and should happen with other street papers. The Manchester Street Poem is a really interesting one. Sorry, this is quite blurred. I nicked some of these photos off the internet. I shouldn't say that. So the guy in the red scarf is Carl Hyde from the pop band Underworld, who are really big in many countries. He's really interesting, really cares about social issues, and he was commissioned by the Manchester International Festival to do a project with homeless people. And he created with them this project where, if you can see at the top, actually, probably best, people will write their stories in quite a lot of graphic detail, quite a lot of honesty, in white paint on cardboard. And around this, there's an amazing soundtrack, original soundtrack by Underworld. And then the public come in and they also draw. Sometimes they write messages for friends. Sometimes they write their own stories. Sometimes they write things about how they love the arts. This is a project that was the most seen project at the Manchester International Festival in 2017. And we're hopefully taking it to the Tokyo Olympics this year. Fantastic project. CREA in Bogota, all over South America, they regard arts as a human right. In Bogota, there's a lot of violence. There's a lot of children going into gang crime and gang violence. Another standout project that uses visual arts with young homeless people. The Choir of Hard Knocks very courageously started on day one, their first rehearsal. I was there for some reason in Melbourne, and they started with the TV cameras also there. So homeless people came in, there were a lot of TV cameras, and they did a documentary on this choir. I mean, I would question sometimes how ethical it was in some times, but the choir themselves were so caring that they made it okay for people to live out what was a very difficult experience, believing in themselves, singing for the first time on TV. This became one of the most watched shows in Australia, and they became household names and were performing at the Sydney Opera House, within years. An amazing organisation. Testament is that it's still going on. Somderua, another choir and a band that you can probably see recycled materials they find on the streets and create musical instruments out of them. Fabulous organisation in Portugal. And then very close to Portugal, we have Basket Beats in Spain. Completely unique because they use basketballs to create rhythms and amazing music with homeless people. And we've got a clip of this one as well. I haven't come across any organisation like this before, and it's really, as you can see, as you can imagine, it's just so fun to do and to watch. They're beginning to work in more countries, and it's particularly successful with younger people. And like quite a lot of artwork, really good for not only mental well-being, but also physical well-being. And then here, I was lucky enough yesterday to meet one of the writers of Untouchables, which I don't know how many people knew about this. It was a play with Nachelska. Am I pronouncing that right? I'm not, am I? Nachelska? Nachelska. Thank you. And if you don't, apologies if you know about this, but if you don't, because I didn't, a project where homeless people from the centre shared their stories and were invited to perform them live in this theatrical installation with amazing music and projections. But if they didn't want to do that, professional actors would stand next to them and tell their story with them, which, according to the playwright Alina, gave them that kind of security, but also the credibility that their story was worth enough for a famous actor to be able to tell the story. Another unique project. And, in this world where we're inhabiting, an area which is, there's so many projects that aren't known on an international stage. It's so exciting to be able to find and then connect these projects to other ones. I also incidentally found one other project in Moscow with Caritas, who put on an exhibition of the work of homeless people a few years ago. And please let me know afterwards if you know of any other projects, because we want to know about them. My seventh light bulb moment is this. We need to find new ways to make the case for the arts. So I can sit here and tell you how wonderful I think arts and homelessness is, and you may believe it or you may not, but one of the problems is evidence and how we express that. And I believe, obviously, that arts is seen to be quite peripheral. And hopefully I've communicated some ways that I believe it is central to homelessness. And I think there are three main ways forward for this sector, and maybe also, other arts and social welfare sectors, some of which is happening already. Firstly, it's about anecdotes and personal stories and we probably know thousands in the work that we do or the people that you or I know. I'll tell you one story of hundreds that I know, which is about the power of the arts. We worked with a guy 10 years ago at Streetwise Opera, and let's call him Billy. And Billy came into the centre, Billy was in the centre. We came into the centre to run a music class, and the homeless workers said, he'll be no trouble, he won't be interested, he will sit in the corner and he will just watch, but don't expect him to take part because he won't. Interestingly, it's often the homeless workers who have the low expectations of the people that we work with. Anyway, Billy did get involved after 6 months, took quite a while, and got involved in one of the shows that we were doing in a venue called the Sage Gateshead in England. We always give tickets to our performers, as many organisations do, just in case there are friends or family members who want to come, and then they can see their friends or family doing something that's out of the ordinary. Anyway, Billy took 3 tickets and a bunch of tickets, and he gave them to one of his daughters that he hadn't seen for 10 years. And both of his daughters came to the show, hadn't seen him for 10 years, and one of them brought her daughter, his granddaughter he'd never met before. So their first interaction together was seeing something that was beautiful, that he was proud of, she was proud of him. I don't know any other area in homelessness where that kind of powerful interaction can happen. That's what the arts can do, in my view. The second way I think we can progress with demonstrating value is through metaphor. So this is a fable that I really like, and it's it's a fable of the vases, or in this picture I found on the internet, of the buckets. And it's a fable about a woman who lives on a hillside and walks down to fill her buckets with water, and then walks back up her path to her house. And one of the buckets is new, and the other bucket is cracked, and it leaks. So when she gets up to the top of her path, it's completely empty, and there's no water left in it. So because it's a fable, the buckets talk to her, and the cracked, broken bucket says, "Why do you persevere with me? I'm not useful for what I was made for. Why don't you just get another bucket?" And the woman says, "Ah, but you haven't seen the path." And on the cracked bucket side of the path, there's these flowers and this beautiful vegetation. And she said, "I always knew you were cracked, but because of your cracks, you have created this great beauty." So again, for me, the arts is partly about identity and partly about showing people that, yes, we've all got cracks, but sometimes it's those imperfections in us that we try and hide that are actually the powerful things. If you work in homelessness, every single day you'll meet people who are the most resilient people you ever met, probably the kindest and the bravest. And sometimes the arts can really flip that thing about, problems and issues and turn them into strengths. And then obviously we need more evidence, and we've done a little bit of this. So this is a new literature review of arts and homelessness around the world that we published last month. And we found 61 pieces of research into arts and homelessness, specifically arts and homelessness, mostly visual arts, but other things as well. Mostly academic studies, but a lot of kind of project summary studies as well. And 4 things come out in all of these studies: that the arts can contribute positively to people's well-being. In the studies, that's both physical and mental health. Agency, which is, like voice and like your sense of who you are and your courage to be able to represent yourself. There's a lot of instances of people being able to generate the confidence through the art as homeless people and be able to then go to the doctor and ask more questions about their illnesses and just have a little bit more courage in other situations of their lives, or their housing teams or things like that. Resilience is obviously a big one, how people are growing in resilience when these things happen, and knowledge and skills. So these 4 things are happening. We're beginning to find ways of demonstrating them, and this will help the whole sector around the world, hopefully. So my penultimate light bulb moment is that it is possible to influence policy. Even being an artist and working in the arts, I didn't think this would ever happen, and it absolutely did. This is in Manchester again, Seems like my favorite place, but it's one of my favorite places. And after the delegation came back from Rio, they gathered together, and through the inspiration of the movement of the streets, they said, we want a new homelessness strategy. So they produced this homelessness charter. And in this picture, you can see homeless people, people from homeless agencies, people from arts organizations, politicians, the fire service, the police, the business community, the faith community. This was a whole society approach to tackling homelessness. It's quite revolutionary, and it's beginning to be used elsewhere. What was also revolutionary was that it was designed with homeless people in co-production, and that it included the arts. Often in social welfare, we get this situation. We get a Maslowian, I don't know if you've come across Maslow, as a sort of Maslowian a hierarchy of needs. This philosopher from the 19th century, I think, came up with this idea that we as humans need these things in order. We need physiological needs, we need water and food and shelter. Then when that's sorted, we need safety, we need accommodation. When that's sorted, we need love and belonging. And then going up the pyramid, esteem and self-actualization. This doesn't actually happen in homelessness. And when you meet someone in crisis, they don't say, I want food now and I want love in 6 months' time. They say, I need love today, urgently, as much as I need food and shelter. So we came up with a different model, an anti-Maslowian model, called the jigsaw of homeless support. And this shows areas that homeless people need in terms of recovery and welfare and housing and food, and also arts and creativity, and also sports. Fantastic intervention. This is it in more close-up. This was adopted in Manchester in the homelessness strategy. Sorry, I went that really quickly. Yeah. I move on? Yeah. So this happened in the Manchester homelessness strategy. It is currently, fingers crossed, being adopted by the United Nations and going to other cities in the UK as well, maybe Tokyo. And for me, it's really interesting because it feels like logical that something like homelessness, which is obviously about multiple issues, needs multiple solutions, right? It's not just about housing. We see someone homeless and in our heart, we probably don't think everything will be sorted as soon as that person has accommodation. We know that this trauma has probably happened since childhood and through different reasons. And so we can't have a system that is just about one or two interventions. It has to be about multiple interventions. And so, finally, my final light bulb moment, which is that co-production is everything. So I talked a little bit before about the power dynamic of me as the very privileged, university-educated support worker administering my generosity to homeless people in the homeless centre, and how troubling this is ultimately as a system of power dynamics, because if we perpetuate that, we will not get people out of a situation where they are powerless. You have to give up power in order to give people power. So to illustrate this, I am going to tell you a story of David. And David, when I met him, on that day when I took a photograph of him, was presenting a piece of artwork to the Deputy Mayor of Rio de Janeiro in London on one of our exchanges. At this point, he was having a very difficult time in his life. He talks a lot about it openly, so I'm using his real name. And he, through that difficult time, art kept him going, and it gave him hope and salvation, he would say. After that exchange, he realized that art was a thing now. It was like a sort of recognized thing. There was this delegation of Brazilians, and the Brazilians were talking about how art was important to homeless people there. So he decided to do something quite extraordinary, which was to start a festival, like the next year. And this was a festival called the One Festival of Homeless Arts. And it's in its 5th year now. It's gone national. And he has created this out of nothing, with nothing. And it's incredible. He has a festival over a few days. There's film, there's an exhibition, and there's talks and all sorts of things. He's now the creative producer at With One Voice. He's now on our books. He's a member of staff. And this is our staff and board, 50% of whom are homeless people or ex-homeless people. Our vision for homelessness in general, everywhere, is for co-production, that we won't get anywhere ultimately unless we, as the ruling classes, release power and give away power to create power. What it means is that sometimes systems have to change. Sometimes people are going through a very, very difficult situation, and jobs have to be flexible, and situations have to be somewhat flexible as well. But when we sit down as a truly co-produced company, half of whom are or have been homeless, every decision is more ethical, and every decision is better as well. We come up with decisions that one person in a hierarchy couldn't make without the group making them. I'm just going to finish with a couple of things that we're doing. We're in Tokyo. We're hoping to be part of the Cultural Olympiad. We'll know soon. We'll take the Manchester Street Poem to work with Socorisa Dance and this wonderful University of the Arts in Osaka, and a photography project in Tokyo called Sanyukai, which will have a long legacy as well of Japanese artists going to the UK and elsewhere. There'll also be a summit then. Every couple of years we do a big conference, a summit. This was one in Manchester in 2018, where 250 delegates from 18 different countries came to discuss policy and projects in arts and homelessness. And as part of that project, the reason why I'm showing you this slide is the conversation I had yesterday about public opinion. And in Manchester, the homelessness was growing, and there was a big drug problem, spice, this new drug on the streets. And homeless people really wanted to change some public opinion. So we got hold of this wall right in the center of Manchester and created this mural with 30 homeless people who created all the drawings with a professional artist as well in collaboration. Now, it doesn't preach anything about homelessness. It's got a plaque saying that homeless people created it, but 20,000 people per week walk past that. So that's giving a very different kind of message to the public than the one of the spice users, and it just balances out public opinion a little bit. It got tagged recently by someone who drew something on it, and within about 2 hours, some members of the public had come and cleaned it off because they're really proud of this. We're working more in the global south, so we're committing over the next 5 years to work in areas like Sierra Leone, where the most amazing group that have been going for 10 years with former child soldiers and with young people who are going into gangs, using music and poetry and filmmaking to get them out of that situation. And as I said before, we've got this advocacy research and training lab, which we don't know what it is yet. Who knows? It could be part of a university, but it probably won't include cats. And finally, what I said before about cultural organizations taking the lead, we're getting approached more by libraries in the USA and galleries in parts of Europe saying, we've got more and more homeless people coming into our buildings. There's no shared practice around this. What do we do? Our front of house managers and staff don't know what to do. So we are going to publish a report on cultural spaces' responses to homelessness with about 40 case studies from around the world, and a training package and a toolkit, which we're piloting at Tate in London and Manchester Museum. And hopefully this will give more opportunities for cultural spaces to inhabit that area of civic duty that many of them want to have, and encourage homeless people in more, and also to work more with homeless people. That's my contact details and the end of my presentation. Thank you very much. Before I go to questions, actually, should we see how many questions there are? I'm going to do another artistic intervention, so just be aware. Should we go to questions now?
Okay, Matt, I'd like to say thank you for this quite powerful presentation. My name is Andrew, and I would like to, actually I've got a lot of questions, but I'd like to ask a couple of ones. So the first one, you mentioned that you did this project in different countries, and no doubt the different countries have different level of development of society. Okay. We can't compare Russia and Brazil, for example, with Britain. And even a branch of this project in St. Petersburg, Ночлежка, which have been struggling to open a branch here in Moscow, even to do some laundry service for homeless people. And so, and I would like to ask, so what's the difference between these different countries and approaches in working, and I don't know, feedback from people? Okay?
Yeah, that's a great question. I suppose, I mean, it sounds very strange to say this, but we're all human beings, and we all are affected by arts in different ways. And I've come across, I think, in most countries, our interaction with small children is quite creative. So we're not taught how to do that, but when we have children, we sing and we dance and we smile and we paint. That's something that's within us, and that happens to all humans, I believe. What's important is to listen also to the cultural situation in all countries. In Japan, it's very difficult at the moment because the government really don't think there's a homeless problem at all. And it's a question of, explaining why the arts could be a thing, could be important, as well as why homeless people need to be supported. And I think in my experience in the countries I've been to, they fall into two areas. One area is that there's a cultural understanding that it's a homeless person's fault that they're sitting on the streets, that they have done that to themselves. Somehow they're drinking, they lost their job, it's their fault. And there are other countries who feel like maybe it's society's fault that has happened. This work is really, really hard, and many countries don't even look after homeless people. So you could say that arts is like the icing on the cake. But I think as soon as you have a conversation about this and about how the art, no matter where you're from, is an important part of people's lives, that's the starting point for me.
Okay, have you got any statistics about how many people have you helped during this time? For example, in Britain, through this arts, through this performing in this wonderful venue, opera house?
Yeah, so it was about 800 per year for about 17 years at Streetwise Opera. And then around the world, we're working with about 10,000 people a year.
Thank you very much for your amazing presentation. I want to ask you about the process of casting or audition with these homeless people. Am I right that this homelessness, that's not the only one category, the people, the person has to have ability to think, to perform, I don't know, to dance probably, so how do you work, or maybe not you, or maybe directors work with the process? I'm asking because we have a Russian director who also, on a much small scale, work with the homeless people. But he, as far as I know, struggling a lot to work with them because they are not selected. He found them not at the center of homeless people, but probably somehow, like it was a private communication, how he found them. So he faced with a problem, like social problems, I don't know, depression, anxiety, problems with alcohol and drugs. Sometimes they just disappeared for, I don't know, weeks and missed the rehearsals. So it's pretty much tough process to work with them if they're not being like ready, or maybe being part of the community, like the center. If they, you know what I mean? If they be so much asocial at that point. So can you please elaborate on that?
Yeah, again, a really good question. And my view is that if you create an environment where there's going to be auditions or any criteria of inclusion, you're going to exclude people straight away. So for Streetwise Opera, for 17 years, when I was there were never any auditions. Anyone could join, whether they could walk, whether we had a lot of people who couldn't speak, but we'd find other roles for them within the performance. If you're working with incredibly damaged, vulnerable people, you can't then reject them once more. You know, it really does not work doing that. And so you have to find a framework where everyone can shine. And that means that in rehearsals, you might say, look, everyone try your best. If you miss a rehearsal, it's fine. You know, life gets in the way, but we really believe in you, that you will come. And if you miss the performance, that's also okay. Come the week after and maybe be in the next performance. And it's a process of encouragement and of having really good areas of safe spaces. So people, I think, lose a lot of trust from, don't trust a lot of people. So if they're coming to, say, this room for a rehearsal, you know, why would they come? Would they need to bring a friend with them, or maybe a support worker or a social worker? And then very often we worked out a system where they made some of the rules about how they wanted the sort of behavior to happen. So we have this kind of code of behavior at Streetwise, which is written by the performers themselves. And that's things like no bullying. And if I do a solo, I don't want anyone to laugh at me, and things like that. So it becomes a really safe space. And over time, all I can say is that not only is it possible, but every show that Streetwise did got 4- and 5-star reviews in the national newspapers. And that's not because we were doing anything special, but because if you believe in people and give them a permission to believe, they are reborn in their belief in themselves. And the combination, I think, of professionals and non-professionals coming together creates more than the sum of its parts. So the homeless people in all the shows, they believe 100% in what they're doing. They love being on stage. They believe in themselves. And that performance, for me, is unmissable. And you can't keep your eyes off that as a performance. And they're often showing the professionals how to perform in that way.
Yeah, so it's always like a mix of professional and unprofessional people on the stage. If you're talking about opera, for example, it's not only non-professional, right?
For the Streetwise performances generally, I mean, the next one is going to be a new opera based on Schubert's Winterreise, and that's got one professional singer and 40 or 50 non-professionals. but they tend to be mixed. For Streetwise and for other organizations, they're not mixed. They're just people who've experienced homelessness, and they're finding the same thing. Sometimes people just need, who are organizing this, need a bit of courage and a bit, maybe a little bit of a few tools. And we're beginning to put some practice guides together on our website of how maybe best to structure this work if it's useful.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I just wanted to ask, how do you set your boundaries when you work with people? I mean, you get so closely with them and you get obviously emotionally involved. How do you set your boundaries in not dealing with all sorts of their problems, or do you maybe get with all sorts of their problems?
Well, this is interesting. So the situation before with the kind of more transactional homeless center that I worked in was very boundaried. So it was very clear you didn't give out your phone number to anyone. They weren't allowed to ask you for your phone number. But then when you work in arts, it's all about love and it's about friendship. And then if I am enabling you to feel special about yourself, you'll want to give something back to me to say thank you. So it's difficult in some ways, particularly because now we're working in a much more co-produced way. So the boundaries are disappearing between people, as they should. There are various ways of managing this that we have come up with, and a lot of organizations around the world have come up with, which is about friendship, but not necessarily being in each other's lives, and that's fine. And artists are quite used to now saying, we're going into rehearsal and we're going to do this show, and then I'm going to leave, but I'm going to come back next week. And everything that we're doing within this space, in this safe space, is friendly and is warm. But it might mean that we don't become lifelong friends at the end of it. It's a very difficult negotiation to have, and I feel much more that boundaries should go, because it is creating this power dynamic. And then it's a case about safety for everyone and about how people on both sides of this world can feel safe with each other. And that's a new chapter, but an exciting one.
Thank you.
Мэтт, большое спасибо за вашу презентацию и рассказ. Я получила огромное впечатление.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you very much for your story. I'm really impressed now. Thank you very much. My attitude to the homeless has just changed dramatically. Thank you. And as far as I understood, you talk a lot to these homeless people. What is the statistics? Do many people get their passports, and how do they return to society? What is this process? How is it organized in the UK?
Spasiba. Well, there's in the UK, we're very lucky. We have a benefit system, we have a housing benefit system, and if people want to get back into housing, it is a bit easier. Yes, there is a similar situation of needing to prove that you're from a certain region in order to get help, like what I understand for resident certificates here. There isn't enough housing stock. There isn't enough social housing being built. So there are, on average, even 100,000 families with children waiting to be rehoused at any one time in the UK. So in terms of just homelessness, it is very challenging in most countries. All we can say is that we're part of a jigsaw. So if the arts is used, people feel better mentally and physically. Their mental and physical health is better. They have more agency, they have more resilience. And that can be stepping stones onto other situations. There are examples all the way through this movement, all the way through the world, of arts giving people jobs and changing people's lives in that way and getting people into accommodation. It happens, but I think we need to concentrate on really what the arts does, and that is those four things that we were talking about before.
Спасибо.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I just want to ask, you mentioned that the institutions such as state and the others are now trying to reach you somehow, and I'm wondering who started this conversation. It was you who went to them, or it was the Tate Modern who's trying to reach you? The one part of the question. The second part is in which direction this co-production is going. Like it's going to be the community centers such as the Museum of Tomorrow, or it's some other projects are going to be like, can you just tell us more about this participation? Thank you.
So I think there's an international wave of arts and civic duty. So if there's any state-run organizations in many countries that are receiving money from the state for an arts institution, there's usually a conversation, not always, but usually a conversation about where that money goes. Sometimes it's to broaden audiences, so it's not just rich people coming to the opera or a gallery. And I think if you go a level below that or deeper than that, it's about fundamentally what are cultural institutions for. And most mission statements or most aims of cultural organizations is that they're for everyone. So I say to people like the Tate, if you say that you're for everyone, how many homeless people are coming there? And Maria, who I love, who I know, who runs the Tate, one of her first speeches was very courageous. And she said, this is, millions of people, millions of tourists come into the Tate every single year. But I want to increase the different kinds of people who come by a certain percent. So I dropped her a line and said, well, we can work with you to help you get more homeless people in. And all the staff then were saying, yes, we have a homeless person there, but, and this is not necessarily the Tate, but there's no sort of shared rules like, the front of house staff may be waking up and shaking a homeless person because they fell asleep. But if a rich lady with pearls fell asleep, they wouldn't wake her up. So where are the rules? And this is about, equality. And if you want the whole of society to come into an organization, that's fine. We can all make this work where it benefits everyone. It benefits the arts organization and it benefits the homeless people.
Thank you, Matt, for the talk. I have a quick question about the workshops that you hold around the UK. Do you have a psychologist present at every of those workshops, or other teachers who I understand professional singers? Do they get some sort of training beforehand, or do they just use their common sense when they come to teach? How does it work from a mental perspective?
Yeah, well, a lot of the organizations do use their common sense to start with, and that's where you have to start. But with Streetwise, over time, we developed a methodology which had 2 professional singers who came into every session, one who could play the piano as well as sing, and they deliver the workshop together, and a support worker, so a professional support worker, which means that I believe in any environment with the arts, whether it's a long project or a short project, there should be someone who is in charge of people's pastoral support, their personal support. So it means that it takes the pressure sometimes off the artists who can, concentrate on the art, concentrate on the theatre production, where if someone is having a difficult situation or the art piece reminds them of something that's traumatic in their lives, they can talk to the support worker. This is becoming more common. It's happening a lot in different countries. And I think that is probably the best way of working. So artists and social workers working in tandem together.
Thank you.
Oh, have I still got time for that? Oh.
Thank you so much. Hopefully, a very quick question. Could you share a bit with your plans for future?
Yes. So we want to work everywhere in the world, obviously. And I have to say, I mean, if it wasn't for the embassy and the British Council to invite me here, I wouldn't have found all this amazing work that's happening, and to invite those organizations, Nachalska, I'll get it right one day, into this international movement. So that's really important. We just want to embed the arts more into homelessness services and to embed homeless people more into the arts world as much as we can. We're going to, over the next 5 years, we're going to concentrate quite a lot on the global south, areas in South America and Africa and India, amongst others, because there's very, very little work happening there. But that's our main focus. And hopefully one day the arts is used a bit more. And through that, you know, for instance, I hope that because we've worked with certain mayors in the UK, those mayors can write to mayors in, say, in Moscow and St. Petersburg, talking about this work, but also talking about homelessness as well, more generally. So I think out of the arts, some policy and some politics can happen as a kind of vehicle for other conversations to work. So I just hope that, you know, even if arts doesn't explode in the homeless centers in Russia, at least we're beginning to make some other political links as well. Are we out of time, or? We have some time. Does anyone want to do one more artistic intervention? Yes. Okay. So I'm afraid, as you probably know, we are now going to sing together. Right. Okay, I'm going to teach you a song that we love at Streetwise Opera. Don't worry if you can't sing. I've heard it all before. You know, I can't sing. I was told when I was 6 that I couldn't sing. I believe everyone can sing. And remember the story of the vases. You know, even a cracked voice is a beautiful voice. So I invite you to sing, to not sing, to be an audience member. Please join me. So this song is called Bella Mama. So we'll learn the words first. Repeat after me. Bella Mama. Bella Mama. Congratulations, you've learned all the words. So beautiful mother. Let's call this Beautiful Mother. And it goes a bit like this. I might have to take some water, actually. I think I developed a cold on the aeroplane. So it's 4 phrases, and it goes like this. Bella mama, yay. Four notes on the final one. Bella mama, yay. Do you want to try that after 4? Yeah? 1, 2, 3, 4. Bella mama, yay. Have I started too high? Bella mama. Should we start a bit lower? Bella mama, yay. 1, 2, 3, 4. Bella mama, yay. Does that feel more comfortable? Yeah? So the next phrase goes up a little bit. Goes Bella mama, yay. Okay? Not too high anymore, we took it down a bit. There's 4 beats on the last note. Bella mama, yay. 1, 2, 3, 4. Bella mama, yay. Beautiful. We have some amazing singers here. Now the third phrase, there are 4 phrases in total. The third phrase just goes down the scale from that note. Bella mama, bella mama, bella mama, bella mama. Try that. 3, 4. Bella mama, bella mama, bella mama, bella mama. Everyone is finding their voice. And then the final phrase is the same as the first one. Bella mama, yay. 4 beats at the end. 3, 4. Bella mama, yay. I'll do it once, the whole thing. Bella mama, yeah. Bella mama, yeah. Bella mama, bella mama, bella mama, bella mama, bella mama, bella mama, yeah. We can do this together. 1, 2, 3, 4. Bella mama, yeah. Bella mama, yeah. Bella mama, bella mama, bella mama, bella mama, bella mama, bella mama, yeah. Beautiful. So now we split into two. So this gentleman here, up to the gentleman in the red top. So this is I've got to stand here. This is A, this is B. So we go bella mama, and you go bella mama. So it's the same song, but you just start a little bit later. It's like a round. So we'll go bella mama, bella mama, bella mama. And you might put each other off, but it's fine. We'll all be friends at the end of it. No one will die. Okay? So should we start first? And I'll try and conduct you both, okay? Good luck. 1, 2, 3, 4. Bella mama, 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 bella